And our greatest act of disobedience is to vote. Our greatest act to lift up our communities is to vote. Our greatest way to protest what is currently happening in America is to vote. Our greatest way to show up and be heard is to vote. And so I ask all of you, what will you be doing on November 3rd? Voting on November 3rd.
And we're back right now with you. We're streaming live right now. This is the 2020 LULAC Virtual Summit, All for One and One for All, united in action to transform America. And indeed, we've had a whole list of wonderful experts on so many subjects. Be sure that you share this on Facebook, tweet it out, Instagram. Just let everyone that you can find out about this because there's very valuable information. Don't forget, we have Jill Biden, the former second lady of this country, who's going to be with us also at the summit, and John Quinones from ABC's What Would You Do? That's just coming up. But right now, as we turn the corner here, we're going to have a panel on education, students who are trying to continue their learning amid COVID-19. And before that, our featured speaker, Senator Tim Kaine, the esteemed senator from the Commonwealth of Virginia.
Hey everybody, Senator Tim Kaine here. Thanks for inviting me to be part of this very important discussion on how COVID-19 is impacting students, especialmente estudiantes latinos and other students of color. We've seen nationally and in Virginia that COVID-19 is hitting Black and Latino communities especially hard. And this is a critical factor to consider when we talk about reopening schools. Of course, we want our kids to get back in their classrooms, because if they're not, it can even widen the disparities that already exist. But we have to make sure that it's done safely. In my Senate committee hearings, I've been pressing administration officials on how to best help our students during this time and ensure that we safely return to school. There's still a lot we have to learn about COVID-19, but what we do know is that we need to protect students, especially Latino and other students of color, because it's they and their families who are disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. I understand remote learning has proven difficult for students that have fewer resources at home, such as computers or reliable internet connections. To address this issue, I've co-sponsored legislation to ensure K-12 students have reliable home internet connectivity and devices to work on during the coronavirus pandemic. I'm going to keep working to pass legislation that offers support for students and families, including legislation I've co-sponsored with Senator Murray to provide public schools with the resources they need to put our kids' safety first. The bill would provide $430 billion to help students, families, teachers, schools, and child care centers amid COVID-19. And I'm going to keep pressing that the administration prioritize expanding our testing capacity, because that's what we need to help ensure that we can safely get students and teachers back in the classrooms. Thanks again to LULAC for all that you do, but especially for hosting this discussion and the critical work you do for Latino students in the communities that are hurting because of this pandemic.
And we're back, and we thank, of course, the senator from Virginia, Tim Kaine. Think about this for a moment. If COVID-19 has somewhat disoriented you, and we're adults, can you imagine what it's doing to our young people and our children and our grandchildren? That's why this next conversation is so important. The subject is COVID-19 and students in America, and especially Latino students who have other issues they may also be confronting. To lead that discussion, we have our LULAC National Education Chair, Caroline Sanchez-Crozier. Let's tap in now and see what their points are.
Well, welcome everyone. I'm very happy to be here to moderate this session, Back to School in 2020, COVID-19 and the impact on our students. We have esteemed panelists joining us on this virtual LULAC Summit. I would like to first introduce myself, Caroline Sanchez-Crozier, and I'm the chair of the LULAC National Education Committee and also president of LULAC Illinois Council 5238. The list of speakers are as follows. Vanessa Luna, co-founder and chief program officer of IM Schools. Mari Coruguedo, LULAC Florida State Director and LULAC National Education Committee member. And Dr. Ana Gil Garcia, LULAC Illinois Council 5238 Education Chair and LULAC National Education Committee member. During this panel discussion, we will have several questions, of which I will ask each to spend about 2 minutes and to respond, and I will prompt the speakers. So with the first question, being that we're in a state of influx with all the changes that are going on in our world, we would like to learn about the impact of schools. Please give us your analysis on how the pandemic has impacted schools by explaining at least 2 disparities seen in communities of color in regards to COVID-19 and education. And I will ask Ana Gil to please begin. Dr. Garcia.
Thank you very much. Yeah, and thank you for inviting me to this panel. I believe that we are all, during this pandemic, very worried about the school system, particularly our children. The COVID-19 pandemic has affected educational systems everywhere. It's not only in the United States, but because we're here in the United States and we really like to explore, what happened in our country, the pandemic has confirmed the inequities, the disparities, and abandonment of our minority communities. The greatest impact were felt in higher poverty districts. And overall, we have 16.9 million children under the age of 18 lack higher speed home internet, for example. The learning loss will probably be the greatest among low-income Black and Hispanic students. And we need to be very worried about that because lower income students are less likely to have access to high quality remote learning or to a conducive learning environment, such as a quiet space with minimal distractions, or devices that they don't have to share, or the highest speed internet, as I said before, and even parental academic supervision.
Thank you. Vanessa, please comment from your perspective. I know that you have unique experiences and focus on students that are particularly impacted, and I would love to hear from you.
Yes, thank you. And thank you so much for having me. It's an honor being with you all today. In schools, we support our undocumented community, which has been one of the hardest hit communities in regards to this moment in COVID, and especially receiving support, which all trickles down to how they are able to show up in our school system. And so as folks that are also immigrant-led, our organization, we've witnessed the high disparities that Dr. Garcia was mentioning, and also how our community, despite these disparities that are all systemic, as was mentioned, they are trying to figure out a way to access resources and supports despite not knowing their language, despite having limited access to Wi-Fi. We've seen that resilience in our community that I think is a response of systemic failures, right? And the disparities that I want to bring up and highlight, one of them has definitely been just accessing basic necessities. If we are thinking about remote learning and if we're thinking about COVID-19 and education, how is it that we're asking our parents to be able to support their students when many of them are having trouble accessing food or are having major concerns about rent or are sacrificing everything in their power to pay the Wi-Fi bill or the phone bill so that their children are able to access school? How is that equitable? How is that just for our communities? And then lastly, I will also mention a huge disparity around information and around how our families are accessing information. I particularly think about our immigrant families who are incredibly diverse, right? Even if we're looking at the Latinx community, it's not just Spanish speakers. We have a high volume in our schools of indigenous languages. enough families that may not be able to access the information that we're sharing around COVID resources, around supports. There's also this large assumption of literacy, that everyone in our community is able to read and write, whether that may be in their home language or in English. And so all of those disparities have just heightened and have exacerbated. They existed before COVID, and this moment has just exacerbated the inequities in our education system.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. Your experiences definitely highlight what we've been facing today in the past systemically and what it's been heightened today. One of the things that I'm hearing often in my world in Illinois is that in my work, it has been in technology for 30 some years, as a provider of technology to schools and now businesses and nonprofits, is that digital equity is a new civil right. So, while we do have to focus on our children, there's also everyday challenges for many of us, Latinos in particular, who have to learn how to do remote working, remote living, and many are not even able to. So absolutely, the inequities have been heightened, and the work for LULAC definitely has been heightened as well. So with that, Mari, from your world in Florida and your extensive experiences on so many issues and the fights that you've done so successfully at the state government, please share what COVID-19 today has done above and what you've been doing in the past.
Okay, so I basically think that it has shown how we have dropped the ball. We have been on this pandemic issue for a while. This is not something new. This is something that occurred a couple months ago, right? However, it has shown how we have not prepared for the opening of schools. Okay, so that is a very concerning for us here in Florida, and I'm pretty sure across the nation, because what this has shown is how essential our schools are to our economy. Parents need to go back to work, those that can. However, they are faced with questions that are unanswered still to today by our federal government, which are there to protect us. So do we send our children to school and in communities where the rate of infection is getting higher and take the risk of our children getting sick or bringing the disease to us in our homes? Do we put our teachers and our workers in danger and open our schools? This is all due because we have not taken the time to plan for a safe opening of schools. And I think that is what is pressing here, because the inequity issue is something that is major, because there's nothing that replaces face-to-face instruction. I'm a teacher and I have conversation, I'm an ESOL teacher. So one of our communities who is in danger of becoming more left behind by the education system is our ESOL population, and just like our children with special needs. And their concern is that, yes, while the computers are great and technology is great, nothing replaces face-to-face instruction. So there are many unanswered questions, and questions that have to be planned by government, that have to be based on science and looking at the infection rates and if the rates are going down, and how dangerous it is to put our children in schools when the infection rates are still going up and are not being taken care of by our leaders.
Thank you for those comments. It is a much bigger issue to discuss beyond the learning, because as you were describing very well, what families are facing and the inequities that existed in the schools now exist in the homes. And that's really the parents were not prepared, and we didn't prepare them, we didn't do our job. With that said, what would you say are the biggest challenges for parents in the K-12 schools in regard to remote learning? We know from what we see and what we hear that it was a failure. It's a failure to have 100% remote learning. Certain children, EL students, special needs students, certain families in certain communities that were not adequately with their right home setup for many reasons. That said, we want to keep them safe. So what would you say, with remote learning having to continue, not by choice, are the biggest challenges that we should know and try to help our parents? So I'm going to ask back to Mari, who was speaking so well about what we can do within this environment.
Well, I think the first thing that they need to do is they need to invest in a plan and put money behind what is needed for these unprecedented times. I think that schools have to found a way to reach students, but it's not optimal because not all students have the capability to get on a computer, to be able to do the work. And I know from our district, many of the teachers accommodated to our students by providing other means for them to get the work done. So I think we have to be conscious of what's going on and understand that it's not going to be optimal and we're not going to get the same results as if our students are attending schools. But yes, we could put some parameters in place so that we are able to reach every single student, and especially those that need most attention and most one-on-one, or a teacher to guide them through this process. Parents are not teachers. I think one of the things that we learned as parents is that it's not easy educating students, that it's not easy as people may think, that just being a teacher is just being in a classroom, and it's a process, and it takes some training and some knowledge to reach and educate our children. So I think our parents did get that dose and understood how hard it is because they themselves have a job. So you're working and trying to educate at the same time. It's not the best interest of the child. So I think that we really need to work with our local officials, with our state officials and our federal government to understand that there has to be investment in education. For many decades, public education, I know, has had less and less money, and we really need to invest to get the outcomes that we seek.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mari. Dr. Garcia, with your long history of supporting teachers and actually elevating their roles to become leaders and principals, their role has been tripled as far as not only supporting the students, but having to support families so they can help be teachers in the home. What is your experience about remote learning? What are you hearing from your fellow educators in their new role as teachers for their students being in homes as opposed to the classroom?
I think I'm going to echo Mary in terms of the importance of the teaching profession now. I think most the general audience really in this country have realized that teachers are essential workers. So it's not only the medical profession and the staff that are really attending ill or infested people, but I do believe that I don't think parents were giving it was nothing in this planet that parents would like more to do than taking their children back to the schools and having teachers to be doing what they know how to do, which is teaching. But I like to say there are many circumstances for families with children, including access to educational resources. That's a major one. Safe childcare is another one, and access to food. There are some circumstances that really has been exacerbated right now, for the COVID-19. For example, not all parents have the ability to work from home. That's one thing, right? And we know that we have a community that they has to go out and work out. They have no choices. And when they don't have choices, then they have the older children maybe taking care of their siblings. And we know how that works, right? So, it's not that they are not able to do that, but you're really putting responsibility to the older siblings just to be, with their brothers and sisters, and telling them, listen, you have to do your homework. And definitely will not be the same that mom and dad is there, just to be able to supervise. Parents who can work from home are trying to manage their childcare along with employment in a very different way. They are taking care of children, and that can become really an stressor of the entire family. One of my recommendations for parents, and I think right now, I believe with the whole issue of being homeschooling, and we were not ready to be homeschooling, by the way. But my recommendation could be they need to find something in this process, just to increase a good connection and relationship with their children. And there is something that the schools have been doing for a long time, and we haven't really paying complete attention, which is the social emotional learning of our children. So social emotional learning, for example, if I'm with my child, I will be reinforcing appropriate behaviors, that's part of the social emotional learning. I will be encouraging cooperation, just making sure that they know how to deal with conflict. I will encourage emotional expressions, and I will definitely teach empathy. This is a time to teach empathy. So the social emotional learning definitely will be my recommendation and my advice for parents.
Thank you so much, Dr. Garcia. You mentioned something that we all experienced, with our families experience, and I personally did when I was in school, is that not only parents are serving as teachers, but the older siblings. I know I had to be a parent when my parents were working in factories, and I had to help them. And so I know that added burden creates a lot of stress, mental health issues for the older siblings. So we're talking about parents, but we're also talking about kids having to be teachers and parents. Okay. So with that, Vanessa, please share what you've seen and what you recommend as far as how we can step in and help these current stressful times in the homes.
I think, all of what was mentioned, I definitely would co-sign with. I think there's a key piece here around the mental health and the well-being of our community. And I think it's ensuring that they have the tools to be able to address the loss that they've experienced. We work with many in the immigrant community, many in the undocumented community who have not been able to receive any kind of support or have so much fear of accessing basic resources because of their immigration status and because of the current anti-immigrant rhetoric that we live in. And so understanding that all plays a key effect into how our students are able to access resources in school and how their families feel comfortable to even advocate for themselves. And so a key piece that we work on a lot, and I urge parents to always be reminded of, many of the parents we work with, they don't want to bother anyone. They often say, I don't want to bother anyone. I just want to do whatever is needed to help my child. But they have key rights, and they have ways for them to advocate for themselves and for their family and for their community. They should be asking questions. They should be asking for translation. They should be asking for support around mental health and social and emotional well-being. You have the right to do that. And so I would say that as somebody, especially who went to school undocumented, who was a English language learner, my parents didn't know that they could ask questions. They were afraid, right? Oftentimes to even come to my school because my school asked for ID and all they had was the Peruvian passport that we came with. And so I urge parents to tap into that, into their power, especially in this moment. Ask questions. You have the right to do that. You belong in the K-12 system. That is your right to stand up for yourself and for your children.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. That's one thing that LULAC has been known for, and in my 30 years of advocating for LULAC, we do ask our parents to ask questions. Their voice matters. Many times they may be coming from countries where they don't believe that their voice matters, and many times other countries it may not. It definitely does here. It matters. So our advocacy is to do that, especially during these times. So with that, I'm going to move on to the next question to switch gears a little bit around the experiences of the students, the higher ed students. So I'm going to start with Dr. Ana Gil, who has such a long history in her world in higher ed, as a professor emerita today, having retired from Northeastern Illinois University. And really many of the students that she has and that she knows from are facing those challenges right now. So Anna, please speak a little bit about the experiences of higher ed students.
It's been very challenging for our students because we really have to, different type of students, and we need to be aware of that because, it's different, a traditional student from a non-traditional student. And when we have a traditional student, they being affected in the same way that, any other student who is, between the ages of 18 years old to 20 years old, 21 years old. But when we have non-traditional students who are the ones who are lately, particularly the Hispanic communities, we have many non-traditional students. They come to classes with with an additional issue, which is children being married, having families, and definitely, just trying to pay for higher tuition, and they now with this pandemic, they don't know what to do with that because universities, unfortunately, they haven't really created a unique system to avoid to avoid them to pay right now. They was given something like a 60 days, and I laugh about that because that just having that burden in your back is very stressful, for our students. But recently there was a survey that was students were asked the question about how COVID has affected them. And one of the things that they mentioned that there was a very negative impact was on their mental health. They talk about how significant it was for them to deal, to cope, with this, with the mental health, particularly because now they're home, because now they don't have, the luxury of the space that they have in the dorms, because now they have to share their spaces with their family. And definitely they have too many distractions around. So focusing in what they need to do is being really very challenging for them. Many students depend on college dorms, we know that, and dining halls. They depend on work-study programs. Because that's what for them is housing. That for them is the food. That's for them is income. And those has been affected definitely, by COVID. Now, several programs has been created. Not only, at the federal level, for example, we have the Coronavirus Aid Relief and Economic Security Act, which is called the CARES Stimulus Package. That includes some provision for student loans. Automatically, for example, that defers payments and waive interest on federally funded student loans, but that's going to be only until September 30. So that is putting already a very high stress to students because they know that this has been only deferred for a few times. It's not going to be permanently, definitely not. And then we have the fact that they can't really work easily in any places, and they were really at the comfort level with work study because they were able to work at the university. I'm glad that we have many states, and Illinois is included in there, in which some states have waived the state regulations, and so universities are paying them now, even though they are not physically in universities and colleges, they've been receiving their payment.
Thank you so much. And we'll be covering those important points that you raised about legislation and what we need to do, not only to advocate to ensure that those policies don't change to our detriment or adapted to respond to today's needs. Those are questions that are coming up. So thank you, Dr. Garcia. Mari, I'm gonna ask you to follow with Florida, and then I'll ask Vanessa the same. As far as higher ed students, briefly, so we don't run out of time, but briefly, how do you believe and what you know, the experiences of higher ed students?
Well, we have to recognize that a lot of our students are essential workers. They do hold jobs in the grocery stores and the restaurants, delivering because they have to have a way to make a living. So I think that, again, we need to come up with a plan that helps them in the sense that economically they have been hit hard with this pandemic. And the realization of the needs that they're going to need. Some of the kids, whether it's higher ed, they need face-to-face instruction. So more money has to be invested in smaller class sizes in order for them to be able to attend their classes face-to-face. So a cohesive plan of what has to happen without watering down the facts and making sure that we follow the science.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Vanessa, again, we really value your work, particularly with the DACA students and higher ed students in particular face mental challenges. Can you please share what you believe is help needed to help them cope?
Yeah, I mean, I think we all know the uncertainty that is happening around immigration policy, especially around DACA. And I was actually a former DACA recipient. That's how I was able to become a teacher. That's how I was able to do many things. I attribute that program that was rooted on community advocacy, right? It was because of undocumented youth that I'm able to be in this space right now. And so I want to name that. And I think something that is needed more of is there was already so much uncertainty for folks that may be documented or that are undocumented, could have been eligible for DACA in the higher education space. And now many of them who might be seniors or juniors going into this professional space, unknowing of whether or not they're going to have a work permit. And then on top of that, unknowing on the economy, right? And so not only are you a first generation, what I like to say, everything, usually you're the first one in your family maneuvering all these spaces, but now you're going to have to figure this out and find a way in which you are supported. And so I think there has to be some really clear systems for first generation students within our response to COVID in the higher education space, and always thinking about the intersection of so many issues, such as DACA, especially in this moment, but so many other policies, especially around youth, for example, around right now, this moment in Black Lives Matter and also anti-racism. I think there's a huge opportunity there for us to tap into the leadership of young people and young college graduates.
Thank you. As a follow-up, and not just have you complete that thought on the challenges of students, DACA students in particular, the financial. Not only are we going to have to help them to complete higher education, how do we ensure that they have the financial resources to do so? So if you could just add a sentence or two, each of you, just on the financial burden that our students are facing today.
Yeah, and I think, through my lens is very much, I think as someone that went to college undocumented, this was before DACA was a thing. So I went to college hoping that something will come, and if not, that I was going to work under the table, clean houses with my mother. I'm a proud daughter of domestic workers, or babysit and then go to school part-time, and then DACA came about. And so I think it's really important for us to acknowledge, one, the uncertainty, but also the entrepreneurship spirit that many of folks in our community already have, right? In order to survive, I know I've met many families who have started selling masks. I met many families who have tried to figure out this moment and support one another. And so I think there's a huge opportunity here for us to highlight those moments and also uplift many students who there might be many uncertainty around their immigration status, their parents' immigration status, or just uncertainty in this moment in regards to our socioeconomic moment that we're in, right? And so I think there's a huge opportunity here to tap into that entrepreneurship space and thinking about entrepreneurship at a long-term capacity for our immigrant community. And then I also think there's a huge component here around what the system must do. And so if we're thinking about getting them all the way through college, right, having that financial assistance, what are we doing in middle school? What are we doing in 9th grade and high school? Not just when they're seniors, to inform them about the resources that are available and what they're capable of, so that they can reach their potential.
Thank you. Well, obviously, I'm a strong supporter of being entrepreneurial. Not only we need to help them, but I do think we need to show them how they can help themselves. And being an entrepreneur myself, that's definitely, right now with the pervasive technology, many entrepreneurs are evolving from those ideas. Dr. Garcia, a sentence or two on the financial aspect, and then Mari, and then we'll go on to the next question.
Well, one of the things that I found, with this crisis, because this is a crisis definitely, and higher education is in crisis right now. It used to be before, and now has been increased this crisis. So, I found that the lack of effective and culturally driven retention policies, that's something that we definitely need to go back. And it's not only retaining for retaining. I think we have a very large population of Latinos, Latinx community that they are going more and more to college. And I'm going to tell you, this COVID really has stopped the way that we were going to college. There is a lot of research out there that it has indicated that the increase of Latinos, progressively going to college, this has been stopped. And I'm very sad about that, because it's really going to have to take again, a lot of policies, energy, motivation, just to go back to the point that we were coming. In Illinois, I like to refer to what we have done, because I think there are definitely some models that we can emulate. We have here in Illinois the Illinois Higher Education Network. The LULAC is a member. We've been sitting at the table, just making sure that we have our voice there, that when they are discussing issues on Latino students, we are there. And we've been able to support, the work of the Illinois Higher Education institution by making sure that some of that money that was given through the CARES Act, that money went directly to support financially the students, particularly minority serving institutions. And we have many in Illinois Hispanic serving institutions. And that's something that is good. Coalitions has been good for LULAC. And we have been a coalition member for Advanced Illinois Education Trust, Illinois Higher Education Network, Illinois Latino Coalition of Education Leaders. So those coalitions have been making good effect.
Thank you so much. Mari, last comments on this question of financing support for our higher ed students?
I think tackling affordability. I think that's one way that we really could, if we want to create the entrepreneurs for tomorrow, if we want to create a society that is able to sustain itself, it starts with education. So I think a crucial investment in education from all the way from preschool all the way to higher ed is what's needed in this country. And that's how you're going to see people moving through the social economics into a way where they could sustain themselves.
Thank you so much. And a plug for LULAC and our history of supporting students in higher ed. We've, over the years, have contributed millions of dollars with corporate matching funds where we raise the money locally. Our council does this for a number of years, and we provide scholarships to our students. So everyone can pitch in, from $20 to thousands of dollars that we get from corporate matching. So with that, definitely we can all pitch in and make a difference for the one student, one at a time. Our last question goes into now legislation, and some of you have already brought those issues, what is being done in the states and what we can also do in Congress. So I'm going to start again briefly for Mari to begin in Florida with her extensive experience in working on those policies. What unique acts are happening right now around the COVID, and how involved are you as well in bringing a cohesive collaboration in Congress as well? So please, if you can share a few of your experiences regarding legislation.
Okay, so with COVID right now, what's most important, of course, is reopening our schools in a safe way to ensure that we are not putting our children in danger just because we need to send them to school. We understand that our schools are part of this economic need that we have in our nation right now. However, there's too many unanswered questions, and these questions must be answered before we put our children and our workers in harm's way. So there's a lot of decisions that need to be made by the state and by our local governments and our federal government, but they need to be based on science. So that's what we are asking right now, is that we look at our different communities and look at the infection rate and create a real plan, a cohesive plan for our students. Also understanding that doing remote learning is never going to be the same as face-to-face learning. So we need to create a plan for what happens for children who stay behind. That all involves money, that all involves resources. So our officials and our elected officials need to go ahead and look at what is needed to create this plan. How can they invest? Because COVID-19 is real and is creating real inequities, and these inequities are going to have to be addressed, and money is going to be needed to address them. Also, when the children do enter the building, there's other costs. There's cleaning involved. There is sanitation involved. Who is going to be providing that? Do teachers now have to go and buy Lysol that you cannot find anywhere, or wipes that you can't find anywhere? Is that going to also be a source of stress for our families and also our students and our teachers? No, this is why they need to really get this right, and they really need to come together for the best interest of everyone in those buildings. So there's many things. English language learners, we have been fighting forever to get native language assessments for our English language learners, because if you're testing, the skill is English, we understand the test being in English, but those students that are coming and are here and are newcomers, maybe we could give them their test in their home language so we could assess the skills. So there are many things that we could do as we're advocating, but right now the pressing issue is reopening our schools that are safe, making sure when we create plans that they're equitable for all students.
Thank you so much, Mari. Vanessa, if you can share from your perspective, what are the current legislation pieces that you're working on in your state and in Congress, and to also add, what is your belief in the outlook of Congress as far as a hope for bipartisan work on education, which, ways we've seen has been lacking. So please, if you can comment on legislation and how we can get the job done at the state and federal.
Right now I'm in New York State, and so they have a deadline actually on Friday to have plans set in place. They're supposed to release those plans so that the governor is able to review them through hybrid models, oftentimes around those policies. What we've been really working on is ensuring that students and families are the ones that are informing those plans, that it's not just coming from elected officials who do have really great intentions, and we have to hold them accountable. But if you're not speaking directly with students and families, you're not going to get the real true information that goes beyond numbers and beyond any of the reports that you could read. And so that has really been our focus. This has been to elevate, highlight that, and ensure that our families are connecting with elected officials, whether it's here in New York City, or being able to uplift their stories. As we know that, as was mentioned, right, all of these potential plans for reopening, there are risks to all of them. There's a risk to all of them. And so parents and families and students have to be informed of what those risks are before we are accepting of a plan and taking a plan on. I also think another piece, which I think, bipartisan work is necessary, I think, in all efforts. I think in education, it's necessary. And it just makes me think about why we have to prioritize education in this moment, how it is so deeply tied to all of the other pieces when we think around legislation. I also think, and I think because our work is so intersectional, I can't not share the fact that, if we're going to pass something around education and then pass another stimulus check that once again does not include immigrant communities, then that is going to have a ripple effect in our schools and in our students. And so every legislation that we pass and we're thinking about, we have to push to be more inclusive of our communities and hold our elected officials accountable.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. Dr. Garcia, you share a little bit about the efforts of our LULAC Illinois in legislation activities, and as well as a recent letter and a coalition building to Congress. Can you share a little bit about the work in Illinois and how collectively we can also impact changes in Congress?
Yeah, in my point of view, there are pieces of legislation still pending, and definitely, LULAC has been at the table, just making sure that those pieces of legislation happen. But I like to mention that as representing LULAC, I spoke at the Illinois Board of Education, Illinois State Board of Education, advocating for a comprehensive learning recovery plan. And this comprehensive learning recovery plan includes mental health support, additional planning time, professional development for teachers and parents, infrastructure to close the digital divide, and additional school time. One of the things that we have not really considered at the national level is that additional school time that is going to be needed to close the learning loss, because we will need at least 3 or 4 more weeks in addition to in every school year from now on. But I'm glad that Caroline mentioned, the LULAC participation at the National Education Committee. We supported collectively, with other 8 influential national organizations. We supported a plan that included $430 billion for education and childcare in the current stimulus package. The LULAC Illinois Council 5238 and LULAC Illinois, we both signed the letter. And I think that's the level of advocacy that we need to see coming from LULAC, because, we have to be a major player in this situation, particularly at the policy level. Just making sure that our voice are there, is there, and that we really have something to say most of the time about how the education is being affecting our Latinx community.
Thank you so much, Dr. Garcia. Obviously, we know what we all hear, advocacy matters, these changes in policies matter, and our voices need to be heard. As you may recall recently, how the current Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, negatively impacted our students, not only national, but international, when they were going to be forced to come back to their homes, facing many hardships, facing losses of scholarships potentially, because remote learning was an option for safety. And as a result, the international students had to go back home, and immediately started with Ivy League schools like Harvard and others. They filed a suit, and eventually they had to retract. So these issues and these matters that we say definitely make a difference. And LULAC has been really front and center on many of the top issues that are facing our country and particularly impacting our community and our Latinos. And I think the session really elevates the voice for education, as Mari has said, and all of us said, education is front and center. Whether you're going to be a politician, government official, engineer in STEM, an educator, it all stems from education and having the quality education, that educator that believed in you, they give you the confidence and the support. And so these policies must be addressed as far as the systemic changes that are needed, and equally during these very pressing times. So with this, I am going to ask for closing remarks from each of you, and then I will end as well. So I'm going to ask Mari to begin with her closing remarks.
Well, first of all, I want to thank for having this conversation. It's a very important conversation, and just well-fitting as we are facing going back to school and what that's going to look like in all of our communities. It is very important that we are well-informed and that we have the facts so we can make good decisions for our communities. We know that education is vital in order for us to be able to achieve what we're looking to achieve. It has to be invested. There's the HEROES Act right now in Congress, and I urge everyone to please contact their representatives and their Senate so they could make sure that this gets passed and that it's not watered down to where the community doesn't get the help that it needs. Today, we got very unsettling numbers on the economy. So we know that our economy is in great disarray. So we know that education and our schools are part of reopening this economy. So we need to get this right. So it is my hope that our senators, that our Congress representatives, also that our local officials and our state officials really understand that we have dropped the ball on COVID-19, that we have to do better, because this is not a Republican issue, it is not a Democrat issue, it's a health crisis. And making sure that our kids and our people and our communities have a safe return to school is vital for all our communities. The schools are one complex issue, but this is there's many variables to a good education. And the schools play one role, but we all play a very big role. And policy really must be instructed and defined by the reality that everyone is facing in our schools. So that is my hope. We need clear guidelines, we need investments, and we need a real concrete plan that tells us how we're going to return to our schools.
Thank you, Mari. Very well said. And thank you for being here. Vanessa, if you can please give your closing remarks.
Yeah, I want to thank you all so much. It's been, so wonderful engaging in this really critical and important conversation. I think for us at M Schools, our work is around, immigrants within our schools. And so it's inherently intersectional. It is seeing educational equity as something that we have to achieve, in addition to also immigrant justice, in addition to liberation for Black lives, in addition, right, to so many other issues. And so what I would urge us to really think about is that intersectionality as we're thinking about educational equity and as we're thinking about schools reopening. How is this impacting some of the communities that have been hit the hardest by COVID, right? And have still tried to access resources and supports and have shown so much resiliency in the face of systemic injustice. And so that's what I would urge for all of us to do. I also urge you all to, support organizations who are doing this work, that are directly providing that support that is non-existent, whether it's by government entities or whether it's by city and local entities. I would definitely say that CBOs or community organizations have been the ones that are leading this work in response to this pandemic. So I highly urge you, if you have even a couple of dollars, go and think about donating. Think about donating to organizations that are led by immigrants, that are led by Black women, or that are led by people of color that are doing incredible work in this moment and need your support.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. And because of this session, I get to know you and your work. And I want to welcome you to the LULAC family and to see how we can move forward and collaborate.
Yes, thank you.
Dr. Garcia, please.
Well, thank you for this great conversation, and I'm really feel honored, to have shared today with Vanessa and Mary. Thank you for that. But I like to echo everything that they both have said. But definitely, the state of education of the Latinx community is in emergency. There is no question about that. I would like to advocate more and more for the democratization of digital access, which is as important as preserving individual health, because we are preserving education health. When we have our children to have the true access and the equitable access that they all need in order to succeed in the school. I like to close by saying that learning loss must be transformed into learning recovery. And we have to do that. We need to think about how our children will be recovering their learning that they have lost. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Garcia. Well, with that, I'd like to thank the wonderful speakers that I know some of you, and I will hope to continue to work with those new, particularly Vanessa, in this unprecedented time where it's not one crisis, it's really a perfect storm of multiple crises that we all have to come together. And ultimately is to really be serving for the students and how to help cope and how to help them minimize that learning loss that Dr. Garcia just mentioned, when unexpectedly we had to shift to 100% remote learning. And for many of us, challenges with remote living and remote working, especially in our Latino communities. So let's continue to advocate. I can say as chair of the LULAC Education Committee, we have been bringing an agenda forward for education and around 3 pillars that are integrated but deserve their own advocacy around leadership parity, to have more representation in our schools of leaders, to build more educators, more teachers, Latinos to become teachers, around equity, equitable funding, equitable curriculum, and equitable access at the table, and decisions that are made for our children and our families. And last but not least, the innovation. With technology being now pervasive, and what I've said before, and I think we all can agree, the digital equity is the next civil rights. So LULAC having the 92 years history in civil rights, we need to add literacy, and technology is another literacy. So with that, I want to thank everyone, and I want to wish everyone a safe time during this difficult time, and hopefully very soon we can see a solution that we can all embrace. So thank you, and have a great day.
Thank you.